Welcome everyone to the Canarian International Meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. My name is Mossy and I am an alcoholic.
My name is Kathleen and I'm also an alcoholic serving as your secretary today. If you'd like to please join us for a moment's silence to remember the still suffering alcoholics both inside and outside of the meeting. The chat is now disabled until the end of the meeting except for the meeting hosts. If you feel the meeting security is at risk at any time during the meeting, please private message one of our co-hosts so they can check it out.
Thanks, Kathleen. Roseanne, have you got the preamble there handy?
I do. The preamble of Alcoholics Anonymous tells us, my name is Roseanne, I am an alcoholic. Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of men and women who share their experience, strength and hope with each other, that they may solve their common problem and help others to recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. There are no dues or fees for AA membership. We are self-supporting through our own contributions. AA is not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organisation, or institution, does not wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorses nor opposes any causes. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and to help other alcoholics achieve sobriety. Thank you for allowing me to be of service.
And thank you, Roseanne. Welcome everyone to the Old Timers meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. Today we have one of Barney's sponsees. If I remember correctly, on the 14th of June next year, he'll celebrate 50 years, one day at a time. So we've Jarleth from Dungannon. Jarleth, you have 45 or 50 minutes. Nobody's going to stop you if you keep on talking. It's your time, dude. So rattle it off there for us.
Thanks very much, Mossy. And thanks for the introduction. My name is Jarleth. I'm an alcoholic. And it's good to be here. And it's good to see everybody. And thank you for asking me, Mossy. It's a privilege to get chairing at any meeting. It's a privilege to be at any meeting. I was at a meeting this morning in Dungannon, my home group. And there was a new member. And it was a privilege for me to be there as well, because it reminded me of my first meeting and many meetings afterwards, you know, the state of mind that I was in. As I said, when it came my turn to share, I just didn't know how he felt, but I remember how I felt at my first meeting. I was very confused. Bewildered. It talks about bewilderment, one of the four hideous horsemen. And I was in a home for the bewildered, as somebody called it. I spent a night in a psychiatric hospital in a lock-up ward. No recollection of going there. I was very intoxicated when I arrived. Apparently I signed myself in, which really didn't surprise me, because I felt that I was insane anyway. I felt if I wasn't in the middle of some kind of a mental breakdown, that I was heading for one. Life was very confusing at that time. I was drinking on a daily basis, trying to hold down a job for an uncle who had employed me in a bakery that he owned. And life was just getting, I can see now, it was getting very, very unmanageable. I was trying to keep all the plates spinning at the same time, and they were crashing down around me everywhere. I was a young man. I was 24 years of age. I had only started to drink in my late teenage years, and it just caught up with me so quickly and had me floored before I knew where I was. I was brought up in a home where alcohol wasn't used. I was brought up in a very kind, caring home. I had two good parents who worked hard to provide for the seven of us. I have 6 siblings, and they worked hard. We never went hungry. We never were cold. We were always well clothed. Sometimes okay hand-me-downs in those days. You know, you got your older brother's jumper or whatever, you know. But that was the way it was. And I can't look back and say that there was anything in my childhood that led me to become an alcoholic. One thing that I do remember is I was maybe about 7 or 8 years of age, and my brother was reading a magazine or a newspaper. He was about 4 years older than me. And my dad was there, and he says, "Where do you hear this?" He says, "There's a thing here. There's some people called alcoholics." And he says they can go for days without eating and they just drink alcohol. And I thought to myself, how could you go for days without eating? You'd be so hungry, like that would be impossible. That was probably the first time I had heard the word alcoholic. Little did I know the significance that that word was to have on down the line in my life. I enjoyed drink. The first drink I took, I hated the taste of it. The second night, which was the following night, I had more. And it didn't taste any better, but I got an effect that I had never experienced before. I've heard it described as black and white changing into colour. The world lit up. It was just something magical. And I suppose I should say that basically I would have tended to be shy, a bit of an introvert, didn't find it easy to mix, and nervous at times. I found adolescence a very difficult time, and maybe it is for a lot of people, but I found it so difficult. And I kept thinking, I'll grow out of this. There were physical changes happening, there were mental changes. I was starting to question a lot of the stuff that I'd been brought up to believe. I became attracted to the opposite sex. Up to that, there'd been sort of nuisance factors. And then suddenly here they were, and I couldn't cope with it all. I could not cope. And, you know, if you ask some of my classmates, maybe from back then, they'd have said, that's not you at all. That's not the Jarleth we knew. But the Jarleth in the classroom was a bit of a clown, trying to divert attention away from himself and really drawing attention to himself at the same time. So a complex character, I realise today that I am a complex character. Christopherson summed it up well. We lost him there a few weeks back. A walking contradiction, partly truth and partly fiction. And that was me. I didn't know what the truth was at times, what the truth about me was. I portrayed images. I had masks for every occasion. And I would put on the mask that I thought you wanted me to wear. But when I got that first drink, it did something, as I said, magical. I could have talked to anybody and I could have enjoyed speaking to girls, dancing. Prior to that, I had 2 left feet, but it just transformed me. And I had a blackout that second night that I took drink. I was away from home. I'd fallen out with my mother, believe it or not, over the subject of alcohol. And I'd stuck my thumb out, as in those days you did. We did anyway in Ireland. And I finished up a couple of 100 miles away from where I lived, along with another guy who was home from college in England. And we finished up, I don't know yet whether it was Wexford, Waterford, but it was pretty far down on the island of Ireland. And that's where I took my first drink. I should say the argument with my mother, and she was a very kind, loving woman, as my dad was a very kind, generous person as well. My sister had asked me one evening if I was taking alcohol, and I says, "Why are you asking?" She says, "Mum wants to know." And I was a bit miffed that Mum couldn't ask me herself. I says, "No, sure, I don't drink. I'm not drinking." I says, "Why is she asking that for? Because you're running about with 2 or 3 fellas who are drinking." And that was right. I was playing in wee groups and that. It had started off in a youth club. and would progress to the point where we were getting bookings in pubs and wee gigs here and there, weddings and so on. And these other guys, they were older than I was, and they were taking drink. And that was all right. I says, you can tell my mum, no, I'm not taking drink. 4 weeks later, my mother asked me, she says, are you taking drink? And I lost it. I says, should Ethna ask the same question? Did she not tell you? She did, but I want to ask you. I says, no, I'm not. What? And this just reinforced the belief that my parents didn't believe me. They didn't love me as much as the other 6. I don't know where I got those ideas out of, but I had them in my head. In fact, at one stage, I used to wonder, was I adopted? Because I felt it didn't fit into the rest of the family. One of the things my mother used to say, why don't you be like Peter? Peter was my older brother. You could have set your watch to him. He was reliable, predictable, responsible, all the things that I wasn't. And, you know, I was just, I know now as hard work, I suppose, for my parents when I was growing up. I was experimenting with cigarettes when I was no age. I don't know what it was. I wouldn't conform. I hated anybody telling me what to do. And my mother used to say, would you stop asking why? Be you in now before dark? Why? This was when I was a child at primary school. Where were you this evening? Why? Why are you asking? And why was my favourite word. So I had that drink, and the second night that I took drink, I experienced my first blackout. I woke up in those days back in the 70s, I suppose it was, late 60s. Yeah, late 60s. Well, whatever it was, late 60s. There were, in Ireland, you could hire a horse-drawn Romany type caravan. And I woke up in one of these after that night's drinking, and I had no recollection of going there, of meeting the people who were in it. I woke up and I could hear the clippity clap of the horses' hooves, and I had no idea what was going on. And I remember sitting up, and I was in a bed up at the roof, and I banged my head, and it was a mystery. I've since thought of the blackouts beam me down, Scotty, in Star Trek. I seemed to be beamed down here, there, and everywhere during my drinking. I suffered a lot from blackouts. And I thought to myself when I started to drink, and part of the reason that I started to drink was I thought, well, after that row with my mother, the next time she asks me, it'll be a different answer. I'll show her. But I wonder, since coming into recovery, was that really an excuse? Did maybe I subconsciously want to drink to fit in with the other 3 guys? I don't know. That's how my drinking started. And I made a wee promise to myself that I would only drink when the occasion would demand, whatever that meant. In other words, I would never go primarily to take alcohol. There would be some reason why I would go. It would be whenever I'd be out playing music. It would be whenever I was at a wedding, at a party, at a wake, whatever. But that soon went by the wayside, because I found myself drinking midweek, weekends, midweek, and very, very quickly the evenings in between filled in, and I became a daily drinker early on. I was studying then in Belfast, and a lot of the times when I should have been in lecture theatres, I was in pubs. A lot of blackouts, a lot of, I don't know what you'd call it, unmanageability. And I thought, well, I'm a student, I'm just doing what students do. And I'll grow out of this once I get my qualification. I'll settle down and I'll be okay. I got a qualification by the skin of my teeth. Not only did I have to repeat exams, I had to repeat a year. On one occasion, funny, I was talking to a guy that night and he had the same experience. It was a guy that I've known for a long time, and I never knew that before. He didn't know about mine, but anyway, so that's to sort of fill you in. I was enjoying my drinking at that stage, but after a few years, it was more and more difficult to get this lovely effect that it had given me in the early days. More and more difficult. And I took more booze, and I went through some of the things then of trying to control my drink. And here are some of the methods we've used to try and control our drink in chapter 3. And I would have used variations of them. But suffice to say that none of them worked, as you would well understand. I'm not speaking to anybody here who doesn't understand. We've all had our own stories. We've all maybe had different journeys to reach the same point where we're introduced to this fellowship. And suddenly I found the drink wasn't doing it at all. But if I didn't have drink in my system, I felt very, very insecure, very, very afraid, nervous, anxious. And once I got a few drinks into me, it seemed to remove these. It didn't give me the lift or the high that it did in the earlier days, but it seemed to settle me down a bit, which sort of reinforced that drink wasn't really a problem. It was more a solution than a problem. And as long as I had drink in my system, it didn't seem too bad, but I didn't know what I know now. I couldn't control the amount that I would take. I started working that bakery early in the morning and I finished early in the afternoon. And it finished up that my port of call was straight to the pub. And I got to realise that I couldn't guarantee my subsequent behaviour. Where I would finish up that night, would I make it home? Would I come to in some place that maybe I had no recollection of going there? And not only that, if that had been the case, and if that was all that was happening, that would have been bad enough. But there are other things creeping in. There were altercations with other people, fisticuffs started to creep in, and of course it was always the other person's fault. I was just defending myself. But half times I didn't know why the row had started. I had borrowed my father's car on occasions, and it didn't always come back in the same state that it left the home, the family car. And I'm not proud of that. I'm not proud of the fact that I got in behind the wheel of a vehicle and me intoxicated, but that's the way it was. And there would have been lies then. There would have been lies. Some guy came around the corner on the wrong side and I had to avoid him, or somebody. I couldn't face up to the truth. And I remember my dad, and I mentioned earlier, he was a very generous person, both in his words and his deeds. And he said to me one day, "Do you know what you are?" And I knew he wasn't going to be singing my praises. I knew that. He says, "You're a parasite." And I had no answer. I had absolutely no answer. But in my head, I was thinking, does he think I'm living the way I'm living out of choice? Does he think I'm like this deliberately? And I thought, there's no point in even trying to talk to him because he wouldn't understand, for the simple reason that I didn't understand. I couldn't explain what was going on. And I finished up, there was just myself and another mate at the finish up. I'd become very unreliable. I was holding down that job full time, and my uncle was starting to give out to me about coming in late and missing days and so on. And the group that I was playing music with at that time, they were getting fed up with me. On occasions, I would lose instruments. I wouldn't remember where I'd left them, what I'd done with them. They told me, "You need to get your act together." And I said, "Why, what's going on?" "Oh, you just walked off the stage last night and up to the bar and you never came back." And I would be thinking, oh, right, okay. I used to think in the early stages of blackouts that people were making up stories, that they somehow knew I couldn't remember, and they were taking advantage of this to make stories up, to wind me up. But I remember in those days, if you went to a dance in the part of the world where I live and you left the dance for any reason, they put a big stamp on your hand so that if you wanted to come back in, it was proof that you had been in. And I woke up one morning and my hand was all, the palm of my hand was all red, and I thought, blood, what has happened? And then I realised it was a stamp from the dance hall I'd been in. And my thinking was, somebody must have got that stamp somewhere. And when I was in the pub, they stamped my hand. I had absolutely no recollection of being in the dance hall, but I was told afterwards, yes, I had been. And that was the first time I realised that people weren't winding me up with these far-fetched stories. And those are just some of the funnier incidents that, you know, there are other things that I would far rather, sometimes that I couldn't remember, things that I would rather forget, you know. So it was a crazy time, and enough said about my drinking. I woke up in a psychiatric lock-up ward, as I mentioned at the start, and they wouldn't let me out. And I says, why? You're after telling me I signed myself in, that's right. Well, I said I'll sign myself out. No, you'll not, it doesn't work like that. And in those days it didn't, the power to hold you against your wishes, which was a good thing, looking back. They said you have to wait till the doctor comes round. And he, in due course, came round and quickly got round to the subject of alcohol. And he asked me, did I drink much? And I was telling him not that much. And much would that be? Not really any more than anybody else. And then he said, did you ever try to stop drinking? I said, many, many times. And why are you still drinking? He said. I said, I can't stop. And that was the first time I had told anybody, apart from my last drinking mate, that I couldn't stop drinking. And he said, there's a place across the road might be able to help you to stop drinking. He outlined it was a 6-week stay, voluntary, I could leave at any time. He did not, to my recollection, mention the word alcoholic treatment centre. And I do believe if he had, I wouldn't have gone, because I would have associated it with alcoholics, and I certainly was no alcoholic. Because how'd you be an alcoholic at 24 years of age? That would be impossible. How would you be an alcoholic if you had never lost your driving licence? You'd never lost a job. You'd never been inside jail. You'd never slept out rough on a park bench, begging money to get booze. Those people were alcoholics. I was no alcoholic. And I'm glad that he didn't say it was an alcoholic treatment centre, because I wouldn't have gone. So that's where I finished up. And the best part of the first week was detoxification. And they were putting needles into me and giving me medication. And I realised today it was to try and prevent the DTs. I was hallucinating. I was in a bad state. I remember a nurse came around one evening and she says, would you stop talking? The rest of the people in here are trying to sleep. What are you talking about? And I says, I'm talking to my visitors. And there were visitors right round the bed. She says, there's no one here. And I thought, oh, I definitely have lost the plot. And then I started to wonder, was she there? So that was just one of the things. And now another guy that worked for my brother, he appeared down at the bottom of the bed. And I thought, what's he doing there? And I could see his head. And I thought, well, he's kneeling down. And then he floated up through the ceiling. And he had there was just the torso and his arms, no legs. And he disappeared into the ceiling. And I thought, I have really, what's going on here? What is happening? But I know what was happening today. There doing their best to keep me right. And the first day that I was allowed out of bed, that evening there was a meeting, and they said there's a meeting which will go to here, and you'll be going as well, the medical people said. So the 14 of us, there were 13 others in that unit, we were ushered into the meeting, and that was my introduction to Alcoholics Anonymous. It was run as a closed meeting in those days. They still have the same meeting in the same hospital today, but it's run as an open meeting. So it was only the 14 of us and visiting AA members, and the two people who were at the table, one the secretary and the second the speaker. Barney knows who I'm talking about. Terry was his name. And I remember Terry to this day. I've met him many times since. Outlining his experience, as it talks about in the big book, our stories disclose in a general way what we used to be like, what happened, and what we are like now. And that's exactly what he did. And I couldn't have put into words what I was experiencing. I know today I was identified. I was getting so much identification with Terry, it was uncanny. Now, our stories weren't identical, but he went into not only his drinking, which there was a lot of similarities there. He talked about his life growing up, his home life, his school life, his attitude towards. I can remember him telling about his difficulty with people in authority. Should they be teachers, clergymen, parents? And I could identify with that so much. He went into his drinking story, and there's a lot of identification there. There were differences as well. And then he went on to talk about sobriety, and I had no idea what he was talking about. And the meeting opened up then after he had finished sharing. And the only other person I remember sharing that night was a wee man who's gone to his eternal reward, Tom. Wee Tom from Dromore. And I sussed out before very long that everybody started off by saying their first name and that they were an alcoholic. And it came my turn, and I said, my name is Jarleth, and I don't know if I'm an alcoholic or not. But the truth of the matter was, if I had been totally honest, I would have said I'm no alcoholic. But I didn't want to sound too different from anybody else. And this Tom, he turned round and he looked me straight in the eye, and he says, you're hardly in here with a pain in your big toe. And there's a chuckle went round the room, and I thought, who does he think he is? I thought he was some kind of a wee comedian who took joy and fun out of poking fun at other people. And I summed him up inside about a nanosecond. I thought, no, the following Friday was when I summed him up. That was the Monday. On the Friday evening, the people who were fairly new into that treatment centre, if you weren't there for 3 weeks or more, you weren't allowed out at the weekend. So there were 3 or 4 of us left, and this same Tom put his head round the corner and he said, are any of you guys going to the meeting down the town? And that was when I summed him up. In a split second, I thought, he runs a taxi business and he's trying to gather up a fare and he must work around this hospital in some capacity. Wrong on both counts. He didn't need to run a taxi service. He had his own business, and he didn't work in the hospital either. He was doing not only what we try to do in Alcoholics Anonymous, is carrying the message. He was carrying the sick alcoholics like me down to the meeting on a Friday evening. He was driving in 15 or 20 miles to do that. And people like that, I have a debt of gratitude towards, tonight. Another man I met in my stay in that hospital was Barney, who's sitting there tonight. And I remember Barney, sorry, there's something that's popped up on my screen, just I have to get rid of it. An update of virus protection update. Barney, I met, and he was in visiting, and we got into conversation, and I remember he said to me, well, had you any drink today? And I pointed out that I was a patient in the place. And he asked me again, well, had you any drink? And I said, no, there's no drink in here. I thought he must think this is a bar of some kind. You're flying, he said. Oh, you're flying. And I didn't think I was flying. And I said, you know, sure, it's only for the day. And he says, that's all we're off, just for the day. And this was the middle of the year, June. I was hospitalised in June through to early August. And I asked him, how did you handle Christmas? How do you get through Christmas without taking drinks? So that's only a day. Don't be worrying about that, he says. That's just another day. We'll deal with that when it comes. But I say, seriously, how do you deal with it? Because I thought he wasn't taking me seriously. This was a very serious question, and he wasn't giving me the answer. I can see today he was giving me the answer, but I was unable to take on board what was being offered here. So things like that. I remember him saying, you know, all we're doing is we just stay off drink today. Don't be worrying about Christmas. And if a day is too long, cut it down to half a day. And if half a day is too long, cut it down to half an hour. Many times I had to do that. And he also emphasised the importance of meetings and going to meetings. Now, I spent the 6 weeks in there, and I thought, I learn enough in here to make sure that I don't make the same mistakes again. When I get out of here, I'll be well equipped and well armed with knowledge and facts, and I'll not make the same mistakes these people have made, you know. And thank God for the people that I met. I was encouraged to come to meetings. I was brought to meetings, not against my will, but I had no transport, so people would call for me and take me to meetings, leave me home. And I owe them a debt of gratitude as well. I owe everybody in Alcoholics Anonymous a debt of gratitude. Anybody that I have met along my journey has a message for me. And I mean that sincerely. I remember sitting in Barney's house one evening. I'll never forget it. The 6 o'clock news headlines came on, and I said, I'll wait just for the headlines and I'll go down the road. And his phone rang, his landline, and Barney came back in and said, you'll come to a meeting with me. I'm going to collect. There's a guy here. He's just after phoning me. You remember Barney Paul? And I says, Barney, I'll meet you in at the meeting. Okay, Barney says, I'll call for Paul. Paul was a member who had lapsed, and he wanted to get back to the meeting. I knew Paul through music before I met him in Alcoholics Anonymous, a real good fella. And I arrived in at the meeting later on, a few hours later, and no Paul, just Barney. And I says, did Paul change his mind? And Barney told me the sad news that before Barney got to Paul's home, Paul had got into his own car in an intoxicated state and had a fatal accident. I owe Paul a debt of gratitude. I owe the people who come back after a relapse a debt of gratitude. Thank God, up until tonight, I have never had a relapse. And the credit for that lies with yourselves and with the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous and the power that I have come to know and believe in as a result of being exposed to yourselves. I didn't believe, I don't know whether I was an atheist, I certainly was agnostic. I had grave doubts about the existence of God long before ever I got long before ever I took drink, I should say, I had grave doubts. I used to wonder what sort of a God would allow the tragedies in the world to happen and so on. And I read a lot of stuff similar to my thoughts in the literature of Alcoholics Anonymous, and the warring factions and the theologians and so on. So I don't have much original thought of any. A lot of the stuff that I used to wonder about is in the literature, in the stories, in the early part of the book, in Bob and Bill's writings, you know, and I get great solace from that as well. I didn't take kindly to this program. At some of these we balked. I balked at the first 5 steps. I remember a guy in Dungannon one night, and he picked up from my share. In my early sobriety, I have heard it described as white knuckle sobriety, hanging on by fingertips. That's my experience. I don't know what honeymoon period is because I didn't have one. And Barney again pointed out to me, and I was leaning on Barney. Barney probably didn't know that I was using him as a sponsor at that time. Maybe he did, but I never asked him in those early days to be my sponsor. But I learned to confide little bits to Barney, and I never heard them back. And then I would confide bigger bits, and I never heard them back. There are things I don't share in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, but there would be a couple of people on this planet that I have shared my life story with. And that's still the case today. There are things I don't share, both for my protection and for the protection of others, some of them non-AA members as well. So I learned to confide, and I remember Jay, as I say, I remember coming over one night after the meeting, and he said, "How are you?" I says, "You know how I am, I'm not well." I was thinking drink. I was thinking I'm postponing the inevitable. I'm only conning myself. Go and take it, and to hell with the consequences. It couldn't be any worse than the way I'm feeling. And he said, "What about the recovery program? What about the steps?" And I says, "Don't talk to me about steps. When I feel a bit better, I'll take a look at the steps." And he just smiled and he said, "So you're going to recover first and then do the program?" You know. And I thought, these people have all the answers. You can't win. They just, But they give me food for thought. That guy, Jim C. Barney, talking about. And many, many people give me food for thought. I changed about everything in my life that I thought was holding me back from enjoying some peace of mind or contentment or serenity. I was saying serenity prayers. I was thinking, what's the point? What am I doing saying serenity prayers? God grant me. I don't believe in God. What am I doing this for? I was thinking, why do I keep coming to meetings? I'm not really an alcoholic at all, but I wasn't telling anybody that in case they'd chase me, because I felt somehow safe in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. I knew what the other members were talking about, but I wasn't telling them too much about me in case they wouldn't understand me. And somebody would maybe take me to the side and say, "Well, I tell you, young fella, I think you'd be safer leaving us because you're not really one of us." And then where would I go? Back into the wilderness and sit on the high stool trying to figure out life and the meaning of life and why do I drink the way I drink and so on and so forth. So I was going to a good few meetings, but I had another 22 and a half, 23 hours in the day to get through. And I changed as I thought about everything that I thought would bring me contentment and peace, and maybe the obsession to drink would go away. I changed my job, I changed the relationship I was in, I got away to a different place. And if it was bad then, it was worse afterwards. And one night I came in from a meeting, I was about 9 months around, I suppose. I came into the house that I was sharing with 3 other lads, And I thought, my thinking had gone back to suicidal thinking. How much more of this can I endure before I drive over a cliff? I was living up around North Antrim, and there were plenty of cliffs that I could drive over, and that would solve everything, was the way I was thinking. And I got down on my 2 knees and I said, God, if you're there, please help me. And that was the night it changed. I had some kind of an experience instantly where I felt a peace descending on me, and it just removed all the nonsense that was in my head. I got into bed and slept like a baby. Woke up the next morning feeling exactly the same, total serenity. I wish I could bottle it and sell it. It was absolutely something which I hadn't experienced. It was better than any alcohol had ever done. And within a very short period of time, I realised 2 things had happened. One was the obsession to drink was gone. And thank God it has never come back. And the second thing was that the debate was over as to whether or not I am alcoholic. It was crystal clear to me from that moment and from then till now that I am alcoholic, that I suffer from a condition which, if it's left untreated, will condemn me to return to alcohol, which, as the book tells us, is but a symptom of our problem. And I know that if I leave the condition, and I'm still alcoholic, if I leave that untreated, if I don't take the treatment which is on offer here, which is the 12-step recovery program, I believe, and dependence on a power greater than me, which I choose to call God, for want of a better label. And there are other terms in the big book: supreme being, creative intelligence, spirit of the universe. There are different labels, but God does all right for me. And the other thing, I'm very happy that it says in the book that probably none of us, I'm paraphrasing here, can fully define or comprehend this power. And I don't have to. I know it's there. I know from that experiment, which I've continued to do each and every day since I get down and I ask the power to grant me another day of sobriety. I thank it, whatever the power is, for the sobriety I have been gifted up until today. And I just ask for another day. I know it's a daily reprieve. It's good to mark the days. It is so good to mark the days. But all I have is a daily reprieve, contingent on the maintenance of a spiritual condition. I try to live by spiritual principles. I know if I stray away from them, that maybe other people suffer, but Jarleth suffers. My peace wouldn't be as good, peace of mind, the serenity, the contentment. Is life a bed of roses? No, it is not. Life's not like that. It's not for me anyway. But what this program and you people have shown me is that I can meet life as I hear on life's terms, and I can get through life, I can get through a day, regardless up until now what that day throws up. And I don't have to resort to taking alcohol. And I have had many other blessings as well. I met a girl after about 3 years around the fellowship, and we started to go out and we tied the knot, and we have 3 grown-up children today. We have 2 grandsons, early teenagers. Those are things which are part of my life today and for which I am really eternally grateful. I don't always maybe be as grateful or as maybe give credit for those things, but I'm very, very mindful when I say my morning prayers and read the few things that I read, you know, how much I have to be grateful for. The day we tied the knot, I reckon I get the best end of the bargain. I don't tell the other half that, but I do know that I did. I've no doubt about that. I'll tell you a wee story about that. I'll finish up soon, Mossy. I met the girl one night at a dance, the girl who is now my wife. And I asked her, would you like to dance? And we danced and we started to chat and that. And she says, I know you, I think. I says, I don't think so. But she did. She mentioned my name. I says, right. And you have a brother, and she mentioned his name. I says, that's right. She says, I was going to ask you something, but I'll not. I says, you can ask me anything, you know. I puffed out my chest and stuck my chin out a wee bit. No, she says, it might embarrass you. No, it wouldn't. I says, anything? No, you're not embarrassing me. She says, you're not long out of the mental hospital. And I could have fallen through the floor. I says, I wasn't in a mental hospital. I was in an alcoholic treatment centre. No, she says, you're in a mental hospital before you went over to the treatment centre. I says, how do you know that? And I was taken aback, you know, and the pride was dented maybe. She says, I was nursing on duty that night when you were admitted, you know, so my cover was blown and the mask slipped, you know, so. And I didn't see that girl for a number of months, and then I just thought I must give her a wee phone call, which I did, and we started to date, and the rest is history, you know. So I have had, people used to say to me, you're very fortunate. When I was first introduced to this fellowship, I didn't feel I was fortunate. I felt anything but fortunate. I know today what you were telling me was true. I see a few of my good friends here as well, and I'll tell you, the people that I've never met before, somebody told me that a stranger's just a friend that you've never met before. So I've made a whole lot of, hopefully, good friends tonight. And Mossy, thanks. It's been a privilege to have been invited, and I thank you all for your time, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Jarleth. An amazing chair. And, you know, right from the start, I had you. When you said, your people used to say, and your parents used to say, can you not be like your brother? Because all they wanted me to do was be like my brother Ryan. And coming into Alcoholics Anonymous has changed all that. Because the big book was thrown at me, and I was told that that was the instruction manual. And for once in my life, I'd done what I was told, although my mother on her deathbed said that I never done what I was told, but I did once. And I haven't had a drink or a drug since the 12th of July 1989. And it's changed everything for me. I learned how to be a father, a son. I learned how to be a husband. Even when my drinking was good, somebody else was paying the price for it. And I never want to go back there. Today, my life is full of love and laughter. There's a lot of seriousness as well, because life happens. But I spend most of my time with a smile on my face, you know. And the amazing thing is that I'm sitting here inside in a room, and my daughter is here with me. And it's a beautiful thing. So, saying that, Kathleen, would you like to say anything to Jarleth?
My name is Kathleen and I'm an alcoholic. Thank you for your share, Jarleth. I'm really, really new. I'm really fresh this time. I've always known about Alcoholics Anonymous, and you said you only heard the word of alcoholic when you were between 7 and 8. Like that, we were introduced to Alcoholics Anonymous at a very young age. We were brought to the beginning of meetings, to the clearing up of meetings. I grew up knowing alcoholics all my life, really. And like that now, today, I walked into my second face-to-face on my own. And the man, I went in and I introduced myself, and he looked at me and he went, am I supposed to know you? And I went, yeah. "You do know me?" And he went, "I don't know you." So I had to say, "I'm Mossy's daughter." Now, this man took my Holy Communion pictures, and I walked into a meeting today and had to introduce myself as myself today to him. But like that alcoholic, the word alcoholic, I have 4 kids. They all know what alcoholic is. Even the 7-year-olds do say now, "Mom, if you weren't sitting on that meeting, would you be drinking beer?" And I says, "Well, I would be drinking beer if I wasn't sitting on the meeting, but I don't drink beer. That's why I'm sitting on the meeting." I'm trying to explain it to them the way it was explained to us, that it's nothing to be ashamed of, that the help is there. You just need to want it. And I do want it this time. I tried to get sober 20 years ago, but I didn't try hard enough because I didn't really want it. Whereas I want it now. And you said about walking into your first meeting and being asked to do your first chair. I walked back into the first room I was walked into with my father 20 years ago, but I done it on my own yesterday. And I knew walking in there, okay, you're walking in, you're going to be fresh meat, you're going to get caught to do the chair. Now, I could have walked somebody else, but my mind was somewhere else, but my feet walked me to that meeting. And I went in and I was asked to do my first chair in a face-to-face meeting, and I done that. And I was 8 months sober yesterday, and it's all thanks to this program, and it's thanks to being honest with myself. Because if I wasn't honest with myself, I'd still be in total and utter denial. And I'm fully acceptant that I'm an alcoholic. And I don't mind saying it. I think I'll leave it at that, actually. And thanks very much, Jarleth.
Hi everybody, Vicky, alcoholic. If we are painstaking about this phase of our development, we will be amazed before we are halfway through. We are going to know a new freedom and a new happiness. We will not regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it. We will comprehend the word serenity, and we will know peace. No matter how far down the scale we have gone, we will see how our experience can benefit others. That feeling of uselessness and self-pity will disappear. We will lose interest in selfish things and gain interest in our fellows. Self-seeking will slip away. Our whole attitude and outlook upon life will change. Fear of people and of economic insecurity will leave us. We will intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us. We will suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. Are these extravagant promises? We think not. They are being fulfilled among us, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. They will always materialize if we work for them. Thank you for letting me be of service.
Thank you, Vicky. A reminder that this meeting is on 7 days a week at the same time. We also have a lunchtime meeting every Sunday at 1 p.m. UK time. This is a step 11 meeting, meditation meeting. We use the same meeting codes for all meetings. Stick around for fellowship after the meeting, and if you'd like a breakout room in the after meeting, please let the hosts know.
And that's it, folks. Jarleth, will you lead us out with the serenity prayer? And thanks everyone for joining us. So that's it. Jarleth, will you lead us out with the serenity prayer? And again, thanks so much for the inspiration.
Thank you, Mossy, and thanks to everybody for helping me stay sober for another day. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And thanks ever so much, everybody.
Thanks, Jarleth.
Thank you, Jarleth.
Thank you, everybody.
Very, very much.
Bless
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks, Jarleth.
Hopefully.